Hey, boys and girls, I'm Miss Kay. I hope you are ready to listen to this great story. It is called The Story of the Pilgrims. Remember, the title of the story is what the story is called. The author writes the words, and the illustrator draws the pictures or has the pictures put into the story. Okay, so in this story, once again, the title is The Story of the Pilgrims. The author is Catherine Ross, and the illustrator is Carolyn Crawl. Now, before we even get started on this story, what schema or what are you familiar with about pilgrims? I hope you have some schema about pilgrims. Pilgrims were in many years ago. When this great land was discovered, Pilgrims and Indians. And this story is going to give us information about that. So I hope that you are familiar. Familiar means you already know something about it, or you can make an inference or make a guess what the story is going to be about. Let's get started. Once upon a time in the land of England, England is a far away place. There lived a small group of people called pilgrims. Pilgrims are the people who are dressed in the black and white collars and the hats, or either the dresses right here that you see on the page with the little white thing on their head. The Pilgrims were unhappy because the King of England would not let them worship God in their own way. So the Pilgrims, remember, the Pilgrims are the ones right here on this page over here that are dressed in this different attire, different clothing than what we wear, packed up their belongings and said a tearful goodbye to their homes and their friends and the world they knew. On a mild day in autumn is a fancy smancy word for fall, they set sail for a new world called America. America is where we all live, boys and girls, which was across the wide ocean. Now, before we read on, I know you can see on the page how you think that they could travel, but have you ever traveled that way? Would you like to be on the big boat, the big ship, or the little boat? Think about it. They're about to travel on this big ship. Other families came along. Together, they hoped to find freedom and a better life. Freedom is where you get to do what you want to do when you want to do it, sometimes within guidelines. More than 100 people squeezed into a small wooden sailing ship called the Mayflower. Now, this is inside of the ship if you're looking at the illustrations or the pictures. 22 of the pilgrims were children. For their journey, they brought with them only the simplest foods like hard cheese, bread, dried beans, and salted meat. Day after day, the pilgrims saw nothing but the endless ocean and sky. Now and then, the huge slippery body of a whale would break the surface of the water. Break the surface means it would come up for air. On and on they sailed through calm days and stormy ones until after 66 days at sea, that is almost 2 months, they heard the words they had been dreaming of for so long. Land ho! They spotted land is what that means. How would you feel if you spotted land and you'd been on a ship for 66 days? Nearer and nearer to the land they sailed until the water was so shallow. Shallow means low. They could go no farther. They dropped their anchor in a peaceful bowl-shaped harbor rimmed with sparkling white sand. Dense woods rose up all around. There were no towns, no houses. There was no sign of any people at all. It looks like nobody lived there or lived in this current place. The Pilgrims rowed ashore to explore this wild land so full of mystery and promise. The men were armed with guns. They had heard that America was full of fierce animals and savage Indians. Now, go ahead and close your eyes and visualize what you think an Indian looks like. After many days of exploring up and down the coast, they found a deep harbor near good farmland. Exploring means they were looking around. Here they would make their home. They called it Plymouth. While some stood guard against Indians, the others began to build houses. The first was long and low and very plain. They called it the common house, for they would all share it. Just like in this classroom, we all share this classroom. This is a common area for all of us. As each day grew a little colder and a little darker, they worked quickly. Winter was coming. Winter is the season after fall. And a terrible winter it was. There were dark days of bleak and bitter cold, far colder than any they had known back in England. Snow and sleet and high winds battered the common house, and the little ship anchored in the harbor. The Pilgrims huddled together for warmth, trying to survive on stale food. Stale means old, and survive means live. So they were trying to survive or live on stale, old food from the long voyage, the long trip. Many of them became sick and died. That's so sad, isn't it? By the time the spring came, now spring is another season. There are 4 seasons of the year. And currently we have talked about autumn or fall, into the winter, and now we're on the third season, which is spring. There were only 50 pilgrims alive, and they were mostly children. What would they do if Indians attacked? Surely they would be too weak to fight back. That means they would not be able to protect themselves. Then one day, an Indian did come. The Pilgrims had never seen an Indian this close, and they were terrified and scared. But this Indian had come in peace. It was a friend. His name was Samoset. Samoset. A few days later, more Indians marched to their village, 60 of them, led by a warrior and chief. The Pilgrims and the Indians made a treaty, a promise, promising not only to do each other no harm, no hurt, but also to help each other. An Indian named Squanto turned out to be a special friend. He taught the Pilgrims many things: where to find the best fish and how to stamp eels out of the mud at low tide, how to find their way safely through the dark forest, and where to find nuts and berries and wild herbs. How would you like to eat things off the land? And Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to plant a wonderful new food. It was called corn. In each seed mound, they buried a small fish to help the corn grow. All that first summer, oh, we're in that season again, third season we've talked about. In the New World, the Pilgrims fished and hunted and tended their crops. They built more houses to live in and sheds in which to store their supplies. The children worked and explored and played with their few simple toys. When autumn came, now we have went all the way through the year, it seems like. We've went from autumn to autumn. Came, the Pilgrims rejoiced. They celebrated over their harvest. Harvest is what they had grown themselves: bright ears of corn and fat pumpkins, peas, beans, delicious squash, and green herbs. They felt so happy about their good fortune that they wanted to celebrate. They knew they could never have survived without Indians. So the Pilgrim invited the Indians to join them in a feast. A feast is a big meal. 90 Indians came. That is more than the people in this classroom. That is more than like 3 of these classrooms on this hall. For 3 days and nights, the Pilgrims and the Indians ate and drank and danced and played games together. They celebrated together. To remember that time so long ago, a time of brave Pilgrims and life-saving Indians, we continue to celebrate the feast. We call it Thanksgiving. Now, boys and girls, that's the end of our story. But I want you to turn to your neighbor and think about how you celebrate Thanksgiving. How is it similar to the Pilgrims and Indians? How is it different from the Pilgrims and Indians? Do you like Thanksgiving? Would you like to change something about how you celebrate? I'm curious to hear. I hope you've enjoyed our story, and happy Thanksgiving and much love to every single one of you.